And I am, however, coming to you from Parliament Hill today because it's the first day of the fall sitting. There's a lot of talk right now about issues around affordability, around affordable housing more specifically, and even grocery store prices and the role that the government can or can't play in helping make things more affordable for you. To talk a bit more about what the government is prepared to do in that avenue, I'm joined by the government's House Leader Karina Gould. Hi, Minister Gould. Good to have you here. I appreciate you making the time.
Yeah, happy to be here.
We've been talking prior to this breaking news today about your government's efforts today to meet with grocery store CEOs. The Prime Minister and the Minister of Industry said that the effort is to stabilize prices by Thanksgiving. Can you be clear with Canadians watching tonight? Does that mean when they go to the grocery store on Thanksgiving, there will be lower prices or things will just be the same? Like, what are they going to be seeing?
Well, I think it's probably going to be a combination of both, but what we're seeing right now is that even though inflation has come down in Canada, food prices remain stubbornly high. We're also seeing that these, major grocery chains across the country are making record profits, quite frankly, off the backs of Canadians. And so what Minister Champagne, what the Prime Minister, what Minister Freeland are asking them to do is to say, okay, let's find a way for you to reduce those prices where you can so that Canadians can have access to more affordable food and to make sure that they're not, taking undue profits when that's not necessary.
So did they agree to do that? Did they agree this morning or this afternoon to reduce prices at their grocery stores?
Well, look, today was the first meeting that they've had. This is the first time that, the Government of Canada has hauled in the CEOs of the major grocery chains in the history of Canada. And so it was an initial meeting. Minister Champagne, my understanding, has laid out what his expectations are. And, my understanding from him is that the conversation was productive. It was good. There's going to be many more meetings over the coming weeks. But we want to see real action, because if we don't, then, as the Prime Minister has said, every tool is on the table, including tax measures.
Why are you now coming to the conclusion that these profits are undue and on the backs of Canadians, when we heard from grocery store CEOs when they testified before a parliamentary committee, back in March? It's been a number of months since the Competition Bureau pointed out that they did not all provide the information necessary for them to adequately assess whether or not they were in fact unduly hiking prices. All that information has been in your government's hands for months, 6 months in some cases, and yet you waited until now to even try and do something about it. Do you regret not taking action further, which could have led to a more affordable scenario for Canadians?
Well, look, I think the work that the parliamentary committee did was really, really important in terms of bringing grocery CEOs in front of the committee. I think what it clarified is that we need to modernize the Competition Act as well. The Competition Bureau, to their credit, has been trying to get this information. They don't have the tools or the teeth to actually compel that information. So part of what the Prime Minister announced last week in London was to make sure that as the government, as the Competition Bureau, they actually have the ability to get that information, to be able to make that assessment, but most importantly to ensure that Canadians are getting a fair shake, whether it's at the grocery store or anywhere else within the Canadian market. So the work that the Parliamentary Committee did has led us to where we are today, and the decision that the Minister of Innovation had to bring in those CEOs to talk in Ottawa.
Is it though just that? Because again, that work was done a number of months ago. Those conclusions were reached a number of months ago. I did an interview, in fact, with you in March of 2023 on the heels of the Competition Bureau's report saying we need more teeth. You could have at any of those times acted on all of that and done more. And instead, it's happening now, which coincides with your party seeing its worst results in public opinion polling since 2015. Is that a coincidence?
We're acting today, right? We're acting after, consulting with Canadians over the summer. MPs, ministers have been out across the country listening to Canadians, hearing what's important for them. I mean, certainly I heard over the course of spring and summer from Canadians right across this country about the high costs of groceries. And so we were in London last week caucusing, talking about what some of the measures are that we can take. And part of the result of those conversations is what we're seeing today with regards to Minister Champagne meeting with the grocery CEOs and, really understanding that inflation has come down, but the price of food has not, right? So we need to see real tangible action on behalf of the big grocery chains. There's 5 chains in this country that control about 80% of the market. And, do they have the trust of Canadians right now? We don't believe that they do, and we want to see real action.
So what happens if they don't?
Well,
I mean, they're private corporations that
Yeah.
owe something to their shareholders.
Yeah.
You've decided that their profits are undue. What if they decide not to lower prices or not do what your government is asking? What are you prepared to do in response?
Well, we're going to give them a chance to respond first, right? That's why we said they have until Thanksgiving, and so hopefully that's a bit of an impetus. And as I said, what I heard from Minister Champagne today is that the conversation was positive. It was productive, it was constructive, so let's see where that goes. But as the Prime Minister said last week in London, there's no measure that's off the table, including tax measures. So I think we need to see what the grocery stores come up with, and we'll respond accordingly.
In March, when the NDP brought up the idea of that tax, you told me in that interview I referenced, quote unquote, that your government was not entertaining it, because what we want is to ensure that those additional costs are not passed on to consumers. What 6 months later is different about the possibility of an extra tax on corporations not being passed on to consumers?
Well, I think what we've seen in different parts of the world. So first of all, we don't want an extra tax to be passed on to consumers. That's the most important part. If we're going down this road as we are, we want to ensure that consumers see a real tangible benefit on the shelves and at the checkout. But what we've seen in other countries, like in France, like in the UK, we've seen Waitrose and Carrefour that have put together a basket of goods, so to speak, right? A couple hundred items that they say, we're going to lower these prices or put a price freeze on because we recognize that these are items that their citizens rely on a day-to-day basis. So if that's something where, again, grocery stores can act, saying this is the basic basket of goods that Canadians rely on, that we know they need in their day-to-day staples and for nourishing themselves and their families. So that's one avenue. But at the same time, our position hasn't changed. We don't want a tax to be...
But it has changed.
Well,
with respect, Minister, you were saying, the Prime Minister and yourself were saying no 6 months ago, and now you're saying if you don't do what we want, we are prepared to levy a tax. There is no guarantee they would not pass that tax on to consumers.
So that's the part. So we want to make sure that the tax doesn't get pushed on to consumers. That's something that we're having conversations with the grocery chains over the coming weeks. But
so the grocery store is going to say to you,
but
we'll pay extra tax, but we won't make consumers pay any more. Like, I don't understand how that honestly works.
Well, we will have to go through that in terms of what those tax measures are that will tax the profits but that will not be passed on to consumers. So that's work that Minister Champagne is doing and Minister Freeland are doing right now to really make sure that whatever measures we put in place have a positive and not a negative impact on Canadians.
Do you honestly believe that is possible, though? I mean, you're basically, again, and I hate to, I'm not trying to be pedantic or glib about it. I can't envision a world. I haven't seen a single retail council or corporation say, okay, tax us more, we'll absorb that tax, and at the same time lower prices for consumers. What is the precedent for that?
Well, I'm an optimistic person, and I do think there's a solution on the table. I think we will come up with that solution, and I think there's ways to incentivize the big grocers to say, you want to provide these lower prices to Canadians, or you will be taxed, and we will make sure that that tax does not impact the cost at the grocery store.
But critics will sort of challenge the accuracy of what you're saying and say that should lead Canadians to believe that what you're saying right now, the suite of measures that your government is talking about, is performative in nature.
Well, I don't think it is, because we have today brought in the CEOs of the grocery chains. It's a productive and constructive conversation, and we want to see real results from them. And if not, there's going to be consequences, but we're going to work very deliberatively with them so that they come up with those solutions on their own, because at the end of the day, we want to ensure that Canadians can afford to feed their families. That's what matters to us, and that's what we're going to continue to pursue.
I just have a few seconds left, but since you are also House Leader, I also want to ask about the legislation that my understanding is will parcel both the GST removal on rental builds and then also the Competition Act strengthening. When is that coming?
Imminently.
What does that mean?
It means imminently.
So before the end of the year?
It means much more before the end of the year.
Okay, Minister, I'll leave it there. I appreciate your time, as always, today. Thank you so much.
Pleasure,
Government House Leader Karina Gould.